Welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor-Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Irene Moore Davis, author, educator, and local historian.
Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
and me, Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker.
About our guest. Margaret Christakos is a widely published award-winning poet, fiction author, critic, and creative writing instructor. Her work has won the ReLit Award for Poetry and the Bliss Carman Award, has been nominated for the Pat Lowther Award twice, and was shortlisted for the Trillium Book Award. She was appointed Canada Council Writer-in-Residence at the University of Windsor in 2004-2005, at Western University in 2016 and 2017, and at the University of Alberta in 2017-2018, and as Barker Fairley Distinguished Visitor at University of Toronto 2018 to 2019. She is now at Ryerson University as a sessional instructor. Her recent publications include Charger, a poetry collection published by Talon Books in 2020, and an intergenre memoir, her Paraphernalia, on Motherlines, Sex, Blood, Loss, and Selfies, published by Book Hug in 2016. In 2017, Wilfrid Laurier University Press published Space Between Her Lips, the Poetry of Margaret Christakos. Her most recent collection is Dear Birch, published by Palimpsest Press in 2021. Margaret Christakos will be appearing virtually at BookFest Windsor in October 2021. Welcome, Margaret.
Hello. Lovely to be here, Irene.
Thank you for being here. First, how have you been doing through the pandemic, and has the COVID era had any impact on your writing?
Well, I've been surviving. I think I've been very lucky to have a kind of lovely space to live in. Friends, writer friends, we've congregated online. And I think that the teaching I've done over the last year and a half has also really helped me stay grounded and connected, especially with younger people who are, really suffering the brunt, I think, of this situation. I work with university students who, have been shouldering just incredible uncertainty. Otherwise, writing requires quiet space, time, and a kind of spaciousness from the normal conduct of life. So in a way, it's actually been, quite a productive time.
So what has it been like for you to release 2 books during a pandemic?
Odd, very strange, very virtual. The book object is a real live organic baby that we carry around and introduce to various material spaces. That's been odd. It's been odd to have books come into the world and not quite sense that they're in the world, or to question what the world is now that so much of it has become virtual. At the same time, it's really helped me to know that I've had this kind of creative output over a period that for many writers has, I think, been really frightening in the sense of, are we disappearing? Where are our books going? Where is writing going to land after this? Yeah.
So going back to your genesis, when and how did you first discover your passion for writing?
Gosh, Sarah, that takes me way back over far too many decades. I can't quite remember when I didn't write. But writing, writing becomes a practice for those of us who find something exuberant in occupying that internal space that also moves into external spaces and publics. I think there's something about moving the private into the public that attracted me to writing. I sort of started as a visual artist. I'm still a visual artist. That story of, one replacing another isn't the case with me. But there's something about poetry that I find experimental. sort of continually. It's a space that I can reinvent writing in all the time. So I kind of like, I like that about poetry. I've written fiction as well and long fiction as well, but there's something about poetry that allows me to reposition myself at a beginning, always. And that has saved my neck, Yeah.
Yeah, and you've written memoir as well, so that slots in with your poetry, you think, and your fiction.
Yeah, genre is always up for grabs with me. I think there's a sense of this sort of fine line or this membrane between, what's memoir and what's invented. I think these two practices are really enmeshed for most writers. We just sort of maybe subvert it in different ways. But memoir for me meant a book project where I actually did some travel, some revisitation to ancestral or family geographies that changed my sense of identity to some degree. So that was her Paraphernalia when did that come out? 2016, crazy, 5 years ago. And Dear Birch, the newest book, is in some ways a meditation on the memoir as a form, but it's also a kind of, rebuffing of that form to some degree. I think I do that with all genre. I kind of like push against it, or make it multiply in some way. Yeah.
You mentioned that you're also a visual artist and that photography has become an important part of your practice. How do you carve out time to practice both photography and writing? How do you balance that?
I think like any artist, we just figure out how to do it. Like if you want to make stuff, if you want to be in your practice, you kind of steal it from everything you're supposed to do. That's kind of my metaphor always. There's a lot of guilt in being an artist. It's a kind of taking back or a resting for myself what I actually care about. And photography really became, a kind of big form for me with, the gift of a cell phone from my brother. I didn't have a cell phone until, 2013 or something like that, which seems like an eon ago, but it was well after most people had cell phones. And I started to recognize the wonderful potential of being situated in the moment that photography represents, and that is also true of my poetics. So the photography became a way to grapple with time and situation, but also with identity around self-portraiture as a woman in sort of midlife. That was a big part of the project. Her Paraphernalia was trying to grapple with all the sort of obligatory invisibilities that are laid on to women in midlife. And so I did actually a lot of self-portraiture with photography. I tried to let myself inhabit spaces where I was feeling whatever I was feeling. I wasn't performing for the camera, and I could control that because I was controlling, the device. There's also a lot in my photography practice that's about social media, appearing within the space of social media and thinking about direct and indirect address, which are really big kind of tropes of all of my writing. And there's something about being able to do something in a private or internal or interior space and then deliver it into a public virtual space that seemed to work both with poetry and with imagery, image making. I also took a lot of pictures of plates after meals. So plates that had, the sort of entropy of the the domestic performance on them. And also I did a lot of photography around the idea of the window as a portal, both the screen and a physical sort of sign of habitat, being inside or outside. I don't know, photography to me is really about, kind of like becoming material with the moment, and it seems infinite. So that's a piece of it, and it's continued. I now do a lot of sort of collaging with digital photography, and I'm kind of working with multiple images, I don't know, overlayered or collaged. I guess collage is one of the metaphors as well.
Your latest collection of poetry, Dear Birch, is both beautiful and fascinating. A series of long poems composed mostly outdoors in the East End of Toronto in a rented backyard space, arrayed around a supremely vivid birch, as you have described it. You address themes such as the loss of your mother, the process of grief, other family relationships, romantic attachments, reading and writing, and the lure of social media. But the birch remains a central character. Can you tell us a bit about how that project came about?
I won't even call it a project. It was a situated writing practice that emerged in time, like over a particular suite of days that were significant to me because they represented the anniversary of my mother's death 3 years before. So there's a kind of vigil, kind of presence making, and a kind of meditation on solitude that I was also undergoing, because this living space I was occupying with my two adult twins at that point was a kind of temporary arrangement. Our family had split up, like so many families do. And I had, moved out of the family home that had been so significant as like my place, my identity for so many years. So there was something very contingent about being in this space. And it just happened to have this incredibly active and beautiful birch tree that was very, very well established on the property, was sort of part of the family's home, really. And I was an interloper in that space, but I also was able for the first time to really have a daily kind of monitoring relationship to that tree and all of the life around it. There were robins that were nesting and, brought baby robins into the world while I was in this process of being really aware of the tree. But like many writers, I use a kind of daily solitude based writing practice to ground myself, to continually feed the larger writing project world that I'm in, because I always have multiple projects on the go. And the sense of sitting outside was, I recognized that being outside as a writing space was a lot more important to me than I had sort of realized, because mostly I write outside in the summer when I'm up north in Sudbury, where I'm from. But otherwise, most of my writing practice had gone on indoors, almost always. So I started to think about that, the nurturing that was going on in my settling into this outdoor space that also brought with it all of these, sort of concentric waves of sound that belong to the neighborhood, the neighbors, the laneway, all of the trees producing a kind of canopy. I happen to be living very close to the south side of the railway tracks. And so trains and all of the squeaking and squelching noises of trains were a really big piece, as was the TTC streetcar route, because the go around, the roundabout garage is also just on the other side of those tracks. So it became a listening practice as much as a writing practice, or those two things fused together.
It's intriguing that the title of each poem in the collection is a date, and that the dates are not necessarily in sequence. Very early in the first poem, you write of the narrator, she is a diarist and as such wants to remember thoughts and events she has lived, especially the delicate events and contradictory thoughts that she perceives herself to be hearing and watching. Do you always envision this project, or did you always envision this project as a sort of diary?
Yeah, I think I got to reconnect with my notebook practice, which is also a space where I do a lot of drawing and writing, usually in tandem. And I also just do a lot of grounding. I guess people would think of it as a meditative writing practice in the notebook. But in this case, there was also this sense of thinking about environment as a complex, a complex layered space that involves all of the voices in the head, which are also memory and projective, like wishing. There was a lot of grieving I was doing about my mother and about the ending of my marriage and various other kinds of grieving. Combining those sort of internal ecologies with a real physical material space that was full of sound that represented, where we are in late capitalism with commerce going on all around us. And then that other layer that we're all getting so used to of being in social media space, being in virtual space. So this idea of being in an environment, I found really, really interesting, just the idea of place that surrounds you, but also the habitat that you have internalized. And then this ongoing process of thinking about our dreams and our moods and our memories, sort of all together and kind of creating a circuit through those, for me, materialities, like they're all incredible, materialities. So I think that was where Dear Birch started to form itself. I was in a place that had a lot of organic external stimulus. And I was also in an extremely important kind of juncture of change in my own sense of what life was going to mean for me. And I was living in someone else's house, which is a really interesting experience when you've raised children in your own. Yeah.
You've touched on it a little bit. Throughout the poems in this collection, there's a tension between the contemplation of nature and that noise of urban living.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that contributed to the work artistically, or how did you try to use that tension?
I think because I was starting to recognize the daily rituals of living in that space in relation to the sounds that I was surrounded by. I happened to be like living on this laneway where there was a brewery, a very, very chic and actually quite delightful, very small craft brewery that became more and more popular over the summer. And so there was all of this sound associated with that kind of sociality going on, which was also, again, commerce, and the sense of people being with each other. Now this sounds, Dionysian after a year and a half of not being allowed this kind of thing, but it was normal. I would have been shocked if, by noon every day out on Ivy Avenue, I hadn't started to hear the brewery come to life. So that was a piece of it. And then the streetcar sort of sonata that played very regularly. It was really this very, very kind of scraping, squeaking sound as these streetcars revolved either out of service or back into service. Those sounds really meant something to me in terms of a daily ritual of listening, like they became the norm. And my own sense of, acculturating myself to holding grief and desire as well, because the book Dear Birch is also about love affairs and love affairs ending, love affairs beginning, love affairs sort of figuring out their own shape. Understanding entrances and exits in terms of intimacy in ways that made sense to me as a bisexual person, and that really drew me into my body. So there's, how grief is grief is an action of the body as much as it is, of what we might think of as the emotions. I mean, it's all of it. So I found that I understood the kind of sonic theater going on around me in relation to the emotional kind of diorama I was also living. But also I just, they're touchstones. Like the kind of writing in Dear Birch it very much relates to a notion of listening in a sort of continuous way, understanding writing too as a listening to what's calling one to write, listening to failure, listening to problem, and trying to situate myself as an individual in relation to the huge outside world and its politics, which were so hard to tackle when I was feeling so liminal myself. But I was also incredibly privileged. I mean, obviously, I was very privileged. I was sitting in a backyard thinking and writing, which most people don't consider labor at all, but is actually quite deep labor. Yeah.
You've been writer in residence at several institutions, including the University of Windsor. What was your greatest takeaway from the time you spent in the Detroit-Windsor border region? Did this place have any kind of lasting impact on you or on your writing?
I loved that residency. It was an extremely interesting residency. First of all, the writers who teach in the English program there are fabulous, and it was lovely to have more connection with them as creative colleagues. My children at that point, I did something quite odd. I actually did a residency outside of Toronto when my children were all under the age of 10. My twins were 7, so it was a family kind of decision that allowed me to go and have that very immersive experience in the life of what felt like a single person. So that really did bring a lot of dynamics. But also, I grew up in a town that was driven by extraction industries. Sudbury, when I grew up, was suffering a lot of effects of pollution and a sort of disequilibrium with the environment. And it was interesting being in Windsor on across the river, Detroit, being in another community that was so constituted through industry and commerce, and where was a very working class city. And it kind of reminded me of Sudbury when I was growing up. So that's one piece. But I also did write a book while I was there. I wrote the book, my collection Sooner, which also sounds a lot like sonar. There's a lot of play with time and sound in that text as well, and a lot of experimentalism with language sort of unfurling and going off down different sort of détournements of assonance. And it was a very productive space for me to be in, where I knew that I could kind of write whatever I wanted to write. That's a lovely thing about residencies. You can pursue your work and get a lot done because you have an office, you have colleagues, you have a bit of an income, and you have time. So I'm very, very fond of the University of Windsor and my time there. Although, it's like 14 years ago now. It's unbelievable.
Windsor's a Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but it'll always draw you back in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So what are you working on now?
What am I working on now? I am working on a bunch of things. One of the projects I have is a sort of it's turning out to be a long-term project. It's a constraint-based poetic project where I'm working only with the letters of the alphabet that fit in the typographer's X height. So it limits me to the vowels and just a very small range of about 10 or 11 consonants. So it sets a very, very forward, audible sonic constraint in place. And I've been doing lots of different things with that constraint. So the project just keeps I don't know, it keeps developing different wings. It's almost becoming, kind of, I'm not sure where it's going, but I'm very into it. And some of the pieces I'm writing in it are very exorbitant. They use the constraint to make language sound really weird, actually. And some of them are arias that I'm setting in the perspective of women in our 50s, 60s, 70s, creating a kind of vocal register for the, I don't know, this sort of radical life guarding potential of women in this phase of our lives. And the texts are kind of like, they're sort of kind of like big addresses that I've been able to experiment with adding other voices to. So one of the pieces for me all the way along, it has been this idea of polyvocality, creating texts that are polyvocal, but also inviting other people into the performance of those texts as improvisations. I did quite a bit of that during my residencies at Western and then at U of A. And in this fall, I'm going to be at Green College at UBC, and I'm going to be focusing as well on creating sort of improvisatory polyvocal spaces involving others, where we can actually experiment with what we can do with our voices together if they're not conditioned into the ways that we're allowed to be together, like protest rallies is one way, or choirs where everybody knows what they're singing and why they're singing it. I'm more interested in bodies of people taking part together in performances that open up awarenesses ourselves about our distance and proximity to each other and to the spaces we occupy. So I'm very much looking forward to that. It's especially obviously after this year and a half of complete social distancing, to be thinking about physical distance in a different way is kind of, it's pretty interesting. So that's one project, I guess, that extends into a few different forms.
It sounds like it was almost a mystical experience, this act of creativity. Would you like to read a little bit of your work for us, for our listeners?
I would. That would be lovely. I've just been in the back of my mind, I've been trying to think about what do I want to read? And I think I've actually decided to read a poem that sort of is about occupying the space of the threshold as a space that is both relevant to our physical proximities, but also to how we exist in social media spaces and how we direct our intimacy in those spaces, how we've come to believe in that space so deeply and also so precariously. So I'm going to read Threshold, which is from this book, Multitudes, that Coach House brought out. There are a lot of ways in which it really relates to Dear Birch. I think I'll do just a little piece from Dear Birch after I read Threshold. Threshold. Push words into body. Do those words form a column or spiral? Do those words coalesce as body into the body they conjure? Push words into mouth. Do those words form a tongue or jetty? Is a probe formed that touches the tongue it entangles? Push words onto mound of nipple, onto mounded nipple jewels. Do words circulate as honey, as tentacles that leaven and stiffen? Are words the door slab we cross or the instepping over? Do words think what they want or rush in, impartial? Fasten words into armpits, knee backs, elbow fronts. Do these words moving into view bulk or break like touch, or are they just its cushions? Do I cock my head sideways, peer along tubal promontories, and at this occult angle drench my throat in letters? Do I tongue roll speech? Do I usher words into corridors we recognize, or do new phrases fissure the organism? Pack syllables into glands, deliver glandular phonemes glad to open, proposition palms moistening in response. wave words toward portals as if bright green pennants, signal presence at the threshold. Do words gush good manners? Do words think about waiting? Can words hold back or off or away until the body goes rigid and dirigible? A warm headwind pushes against the body the way words do. Words form a column or spiral of headwind, and it is honeyed, it is tentacled, it is probing. Words suckle the column and nipple the mound, delve inside ducts and shovel out insides. Let's push words into coming, gnash words into coming into body, shove grammar onto parts, load coming into each. Is it the threshold of coming or the deep thrash of asking? I wonder, do words have any clue? I wonder if words hold me, or if you do. Maybe there's zero here, save our so green thresholds. And I'll just read a short piece from Dear Birch, which is addressed to this beautiful birch tree, right in the first segment of the book. It's the second text called August 19th. As a long and slow second thought, she properly takes you in, your zinging cicada trill, your outfurled flags of foliage, the neighbor baby's large grunts, like garden toads, palpable through their shared fence. In the kitchen behind her, her own twins are in their home shorts, swilling warm salt water across the healing sockets where their wisdom teeth were tugged out 3 days ago. Houseflies and moths flit in her periphery. Your special vitamin is a quiet patience for reading. You line yourself up to enter her radiant syrup, supplemental toxin. She is becoming intoxicated. I'll leave it there.
How beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thanks so much for this lovely conversation. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for being here with us, Margaret Christakos, and we're looking forward to seeing you at the virtual 2021 BookFest Windsor.
Can't wait. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.